made my debut for Bristol City. 30 minutes in, twisted, blew out my knee. I played for 10 more years, but I never really recovered from that.
You are an ex-professional footballer. Since I'm an entrepreneur and property investor, founding the Performance Property Group, which is a multi-million pound portfolio with over 30 million pounds of deals.
I have not been able to use any of the skills of being a footballer. All those hours in for 20 years, never use again. 40% of players face bankruptcy or significant financial distress within 5 years of retiring, because that's when you're most sensitive. Retirement is such a strange word, because who retires at 27? Football will retire you. If you're used to earning 10 grand a week at 20 years old, you don't value anything anymore. When you then realise how hard it is to earn 100 grand a year in the real world, you realise you're competing against people who are 10, 15, 20 years in that industry, yet 100 grand a year in football is nothing. That's very difficult to accept for a lot of sportsmen, and it hits them in the face. So when you've got those big mortgages, you've got those big cars, it's like a noose around your neck.
This episode is sponsored by Merry Oaks Property Finance Brokerage. Merry Oaks is a finance brokerage for investors, developers, landlords, SMEs across the country, helping you with all of your finance needs. So whether it's bridging, development, commercial, buy-to-lets, HMOs, service accommodation, industrial, hotels, the whole 9 yards, whether it's for your portfolio, whether it's for your business, we can support you. Please contact us. We've got the link in the show notes, and we look forward to hearing from you. Now, back to the episode. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Property People. Today, I am joined by Mr. Christian Ribeiro.
Ribeiro, you're close enough. I've heard that a million times, so you're fine.
I should have checked before we
No,
started.
it's all right.
But thank you for coming all the way from Gloucestershire.
Yes, yeah.
Very nice. Make good cheese over there.
Yeah, I've been there. I grew up in Swansea, came across to Gloucestershire, and then with football went all over the place. Been in Manchester, but having a little girl now, coming back to Gloucestershire.
Absolutely. Brilliant. Well, I'm going to do a little quick intro before we dive into everything. You are an ex-professional footballer.
Yeah, definitely. Ex. No more running anymore.
No more running, unless it's on a treadmill. You still keep fit,
No,
though?
the old knee. I retired at 27. I'm sure we'll discuss that. So I stay away from all the impact stuff, as it's
Do you not do any
common
cycling
issue.
or anything?
Not a little bit, but no, just a little bit of gym fitness things. But it's a lot of ex-players in all sorts of sports. Your bodies are pretty shot by the time you finish these sports.
Wow. Okay. Very good. Well, you played, represented Wales internationally.
Yeah, fortunate enough a couple of times. Yeah.
And you've played for Bristol City, Scunthorpe United, Exeter City, Oxford United.
Yeah.
Before, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, because you're doing some great stuff right now at the tender age of 27. In the rock and roll world, 27 is could have been worse.
Yeah. Well, I'm just turned 36, so I'm coming up to that 10 years post. It feels like a whole different life. It feels like a long, long time ago.
Very good. But you've since become an entrepreneur and property investor, founding the Performance Property Group.
Yeah.
Which is a multi-million pound portfolio with over 30 million pounds of deals transacted and 600 plus managed assets.
Well, it's a bit of a split there, because you're combining the letting agency side, which is a bit of like a sister company. So I think we've probably getting up towards 200 transactions for players and ourselves. That's probably just under 35 million of property there, as the letting agency is not owned by me, it's owned by my business partner, and that's become a bit of a sister company really, where everything feeds through and that manages. And I think over time now, as this builds, we might sort of absorb that over the years. But yeah, it's kind of trying to build, we'll talk about, I'm sure, a bit of an ecosystem. To have it all under one roof.
You're now importantly helping other athletes and investors transition from becoming, getting their money from one particular place, putting it into multiple streams of income. And a lot of, I think that what comes with being a sports person, and you'll let me know, is like the level of discipline that you need to be able to really be successful
100%.
And have that financial literacy. But before we go into all of that, because there's lots to cover, and I'm very excited to do it, because I think you are actually the second sports person that's gone into. There was another chap, Richard Thorpe, who was into rugby. I don't know.
Yes, I know of him. I think I've watched a couple of videos and things, but no, never met him.
Yeah, also a very good guy. But who were you at school? What type of person were you? I assume you were sporty.
Yeah, just as I mentioned, I was born in Swansea and was out until I was 5-6 years old, and then just from my father changing work, moved across the bridge there to Gloucestershire, and then grew up over there. I've got one sister. really nice, family there. Where Gloucestershire's a really nice place to grow up, and for me, sport was always the number one thing. Football was the big thing, and Bristol City was the best club in that catchment of probably within an hour as such, because Southwest generally is rugby. It's one of the only areas of the country where rugby comes first. So when you go to the schools there, you play rugby and then you might get the chance to play football. It's probably nowhere else in the country really.
I was going to say, that. So how did you manage to go into football instead of rugby? Were you any good at rugby? Did you like playing rugby?
I think a lot of what happens in sport, you end up playing, I think a lot of sports athletes will say the same. Rugby and football, there's a lot of similar skill sets. The rugby guys won't like me saying this, but a lot of footballers can play rugby, but not a lot of rugby guys can play football. So you might be good athletes at running and impact and all the rest of it, but football's a different technique, skill set. So what normally happens is you have to pick one at some point, because I remember when I got to about 12, 13, I was already playing at Bristol City for the football side, and then it was called Bristol Shoguns at the time with the rugby team, and they were saying, well, come and play for us, because my main strength was speed and agility, so they thought, well, come over, we'll train you the rugby side. But I was always a
winger or something.
But then at that age, when you get to 12, 13, people start being 6 foot tall and 6'2", and they start. So when you play, I was playing for the rugby, and then I couldn't play for the football because I'd be covered in dead legs, bruises, injuries. So it was very much you pick one or the other now, and this is going to change the next 10 years of your life, really, of where you go. And then I picked football, and there's some. I wonder, should I have maybe chosen rugby instead? Would that have led to something? But yeah, it's
the pay in football is generally bigger if you get to the Premier League.
Exactly.
For example.
There's huge competitive nature. I think only 0.1% of players get to the professional level, and to get to the Premiership is a tiny, another 1% of that, and international level and whatnot. So the money's better there. And what I think is better in the football is just more teams, because probably the best in the world in England that you have. The Premiership is obviously probably the best in the world. The Championship is also a massive league. The wages and the clubs now are huge.
They're doing really well.
Far beyond any other country in the world. The second level is that higher level. And League 1 and 2 are still professional, earning good wages. Not astronomical wages, but still good wages. So there's a lot of teams there that you can play for, but you still have nowadays with the money side of things, there's still a very small amount of positions, because millions of people play football. So it's a tiny percent chance, and you've obviously got the rest of the world competing as well now, more than ever. So it's very, very hard to make it professional. And then once you get into there, there's amazing highs of all of that, but there's plenty of lows of that as well.
And just touch on the football stuff, like Bristol City, like what division were they in?
So when I came through, they were Championship. So and they were always, with Steve Lansdowne as the owner there, he was always trying his best to create Bristol. Bristol never had a Premiership team, and I think it's like the ninth biggest city in the country. It's always been desperate to get into the Premier League, and the amount of money he's bankrolled into Bristol City, he is Mr. Bristol. He bought the rugby, the basketball, all this stuff, and they've never quite been able to do it.
Why not?
I think, sport's a bit of luck at the end of the day as well, and you are governed a bit by the fair play rules. You can't just go out and pump in ridiculous amount of money if you're not bringing it in. So there is some handcuffs on that. But they have got close a number of times. When I was there, they got to the playoff final and lost 1-0 to Hull, which was a volley by Dean Windass. And that was, so they were one game away from Premier League, and maybe the history would have been different from there. But that time was, for me personally, my peak potential was in the early start of my career. So Bristol was the best team locally, went to play for there. And just because I was a bit of a home bird, and I was always treated well there, I never left, and that was probably my biggest regret. There was a few opportunities I had to go to the Premier Leagues in the London teams or Northwest, and I always loved Bristol. It was home. I used to live from home. It was only 45 minutes.
All your friends are there.
And so I stayed, and then we'll talk about all the injuries and things, and I think of the what if, what if I made a different decision in those years.
And so going back to where I usually like to start, which is school, and where you were a sporty guy. How about academically? Were you any good at the GCSEs?
I did. I went to a grammar school, so I went to a regular primary school that was out of area for the best grammar school. But my parents said, look, we'd like you to try the test. And I would say I was always intelligent, but not, I would never say 10 out of 10 extremely intelligent, but I was always hardworking. So if you told me I had to do something, so I'd train out and did as best I could. But I think I got in on the waiting list, so I wasn't like I was flying through at the top level. But then went to this grammar school and I really enjoyed it. It was called Marling. Still have lots of friends from there today. And now that school is a really high rated school as well. It was great. So in the A levels, and I only did one A level because by then I was professional. So I wasn't really going to school. Like you go back into first team. But got all my GCSEs of A's and A stars, which I wouldn't say I was an A star level of student, but I was in a good environment, and environment's everything. So the level being that much higher dragged me up. And I put the hours in. I think that's a real trait of a lot of the guys that get into professional sport and all the rest of it. Is just I was probably 7 out of 10 on most things. I wasn't particularly amazing, but I made sure I worked really hard to try and get some levels out of it. I've never really used those qualifications or anything since, really. But that's kind of the building blocks of if you want to be a professional sportsman, you have to give 100% in everything.
And then
all the
usually
time.
For football, it's the YT. Where you become a YT.
Yeah. Well, back then, I don't know if the rules have changed slightly now. So when you at 16, so that's when you've done your GCSEs, you're generally being offered a professional contract or what's called a YT, essentially. Maybe they changed the wording now. You weren't allowed to sign a professional contract until you turned 17. So that was just the rules across the board. You could be the best player in the country. You would have to go into a youth team contract first. And back then, it was about 50 quid a week. Maybe some of the bigger, maybe for Man United, it might be a couple of £100 a week. We were on £50 a week, I think it was. But at that time, I was at the sort of peak of my potential, and I was offered. It was till December I turned 17, so 6 months on the youth.
You were at the peak
contract.
of your potential at 16, you'd say?
16 to 19, I would say, yeah. Before my knee, 16 to 18, I would say. That was peak of demand. So I was offered 6 months contract for the youth team with then, I think it was a 2 or 3 year professional contract. So that was the point of the first time of, well, do you want to go and join some of the London teams? Do you want to go join Northwest? And I thought, well, I've got it pretty good here. I've got some security here. I've already that was quite a big jump up when you get the professional contract. It was only 6 months down the line. They bought me a car, which was only a small, cheap Clio that I had. But these are part of the things my dad negotiated into the contract with negotiating with people like Steve Lansdowne, who's one of the wealthiest people in the country.
Really?
So it's a real funny stories around that my dad would love to share with you. But I was just well looked after. I was comfortable. And Bristol City were championships. It wasn't like they were rubbish level. They still had ambitions to go higher. And I thought, well, it'd be great if I could build here, give a bit back to the club that's kind of made me, and then hope to step on from there. Unfortunately, it didn't go that way in the end.
Tell us about this injury. How did it start?
The way it sort of, this is 2 years in now, so I'm getting to about 18 years old, and you're still young in terms of first team level, but I'm getting to that level now where you're really starting to push the first team players. You're on the bench or you're close to level. So once you start playing at that level, your value skyrockets. So for the club, there's an incentive to try and play you generally. And for yourself, this is an opportunity to get ahead of others. And at that point, I think I was 18 years old, so it was my third year then effectively professional. And in that summer, I was playing for Wales under-21s the year before, and things were going very well. And I had an opportunity to go to Everton for £1 million, and that was 2008, so it was a long time. So £1 million quid was a lot of money back then. And I turned it down.
Still is today, by the way.
Yeah, well, no, it is in, but relatively, if you look at where the 18-year-olds now, they're going for 8 million and 10 million and 5 million. And so I only use that as a bit of a barometer. That was when I had demand for my services. That's when I thought, do you know what? I'm in that top bracket of level of player.
What position were you playing?
I was defender, centre-back, right-back. I wasn't the most skillful at all. I was very steady from a skill technique point of view, but I was very athletic. So I think I had the toolkit that if you go to a high-level coaching setup, they could see that potential. Maybe you could build a Premiership level or top Championship level. But I didn't go. And 2 to 4 weeks later, made my debut for Bristol City. 30 minutes in, twisted, blew out my knee. And I never... I played for 10 more years. I know I'm covering my whole career. But I never really recovered from that. My game was all about athleticism, speed and agility. And when I came back, I remember vividly not being able to turn off my leg the same. I couldn't jump the same off that leg. Bear in mind, the rehab 17 years ago was so much worse than it is today. That same injury, I would have had a different career. These guys are coming back and they're very near the same. The level back then was way worse. I won't go into it in depth, but what I went through effectively was I had to change the way I played. I did things like I played on the as a right back, and I wouldn't turn off my left leg the same, so I'd change my body angles different, so I'd almost run in straight lines, which sounds daft when I say it, but you just have to change your game to suit your body. And what happened for me, the rest of my career, I was just dogged with injuries. My knee deteriorated. I've torn pretty much every muscle in my legs, disc bulges in my back. I've had my ankle blown out and had surgery. So when I retired by 27, that was the final bit of your cartilage has gone in your knee. Well, they effectively said, you've got a 60-year-old knee. So if you want to carry on playing, and I was 27, turning 28, then we might be able to patch you up to not train every week. You'll take all the painkillers and you might play, but you might be struggling to walk in your 30s. Bear in mind, at this time, I was at League One at Oxford. So it was good level, but really in the grand scheme of things for your life, who cares? You know, I was kind of like, I'm done. I've spent my whole footballing career surviving day after day, looking after my knee, looking after this failing body. So retirement for me was kind of a bit of relief than it was a negative.
God, that's so
yeah, so I had as I mentioned, unfortunately, some people have amazing careers and have some luck. I was on the other side where I started high and actually went downwards on the levels, and my body deteriorated as well. So mine was more a negative experience in football, which some of it in my control, a lot of it out of my control. It's just how it goes sometimes.
It's just how it goes. But interestingly, in that 10 years, for some people I know, like do a university degree, or they will start doing a property investment, or doing they might do different things, because there's a lot of downtime being a footballer, right? Because you do, but how many hours a week do you do?
It depends. Every club's different, but if you're lazy about it, you could be finished by 2 o'clock at most days, and you have a day off in the week. You'll have your Sunday. Depends on how much you're traveling and playing, but it's very easy. If you do nothing, you can waste. Yeah, but you'll very quickly get to 30 to 35, and you look back and go, I haven't got any qualifications in anything else. Whatever, I'm sure we'll go through this, but I'm going to start at the bottom of the ladder, and I have nothing else. I've never done anything else other than kick a football. I don't even know what I like, and that is the reality for sports athletes. Is for someone like me, I was at Bristol City at 10 years old, so I was there till I was 22, then moved around some of the Football League clubs, League 1 and 2, but I was done by 27, so I'd never had an experience of anything else. So it's quite a big step, when you've built your life around that, I guess, from the identity side of things, that ego side that you build up, from a status, from an income point of view. It really is a big shift you go through, and you can never use those skills again. That's the big kicker I think people forget, is you've honed tens of thousands of hours to be, I use the term world class, but top class, to be in that 0.1% to be professional. But then that skill set's gone forever. If you think of most skill sets out there, even if you lose your job, you still have that skill set. You can go and get another job or something similar using it. I have not been able to use any of the skills of being a footballer, majority of it. There's some things we'll talk about from the discipline and hard work side, but the actual technique and skill and learning the game and everything, I put all those hours in for 20 years, never use again, all gone.
What about coaching?
The challenge with coaching, it's very different to playing, first of all. Just because you're a good player doesn't mean you'll be a good coach. Two completely separate things. And unfortunately, the two, I briefly looked into it, and I think coaching works best if you're financially secure, is the truth of it, because the money is not there in coaching. The security is not there in coaching. So the average coaching wage is 30 to 35 grand a year. So in football, that's youth team wages for most sort of guys. If they're used to, if we talk a League One level, which might be earning 100, 150 grand a year, Championship guys are earning 500 to £1 million in any position. It's a hell of a big drop. So the guys that do it generally is because they're passionate, because they've done well elsewhere. If you're relying on that job to work your way up the ladder to be secure and wealthy, it's very difficult. And the sad reality is, you could be a brilliant coach, get your way all the way to the top. You're only 4 or 5 games from the sack, no matter who you are. If you lose 4 games on the trot, 5-0, you are sacked. And you could have a red card in the first 10 minutes of those 4 or 5 games. So I find that very hard to put so much effort and time into something that is that much luck at the end of it, and there is that. And I'm not arguing saying that coaching's a bad thing to do. I think it's amazing, but I think it works best if you've had a top career, Premiership, Championship, you're financially set elsewhere, and then you put your time into it because you're passionate. You don't have to do it for the money side of things, and then you do it because you love football, you love working with athletes and improving them and all the benefits that give. But it's a hard slog, and the security is a big thing.
move that microphone just
Sorry,
a little. Can we just be like, you can
Yeah.
up and down,
Sorry, closer.
Just make sure it's in front of you.
Yeah.
So interesting. So from the once you had we had a lot of downtime, and what did you do in your downtime? This episode is sponsored by Merry Oaks Property Finance Brokerage. Merry Oaks is a finance brokerage for investors, developers, landlords, SMEs across the country, helping you with all of your finance needs. So whether it's bridging, development, commercial, buy-to-lets, HMOs, service accommodation, industrial, hotels, the whole 9 yards, whether it's for your portfolio, whether it's for your business, we can support you. Please contact us. We've got the link in the show notes, and we look forward to hearing from you. Now, back to the episode.
I wouldn't say I was amazingly effective at it. I know we'll go into the property side of things.
Because when did the property start?
I was fortunate. My biggest ever contract was at 18 years old. So as I mentioned, my career was almost inverse to most, where I was in the championship. I had that this contract signed. After that, when I mentioned I had another 4-year contract, and it tiered up over the years. So I was able to buy in Bristol, which is an expensive part of the world, a flat at 19 years old. And I bought this in the centre of Bristol. I still have it today. I lived there whilst I was there, and I built up another pot and bought another one. So at that time, all it was my father said, it's probably a good idea to put your money in. It was 2009. Nice. It was probably a reasonably decent time to buy. Everything was a bit depressed on the pricing side and demand side. Then. Yeah, and Bristol has done phenomenally well in certain areas. But I look back to those properties, and now it's the case that you bought them in your personal name. You have difficulties with those now, and they're now higher values. They're not traditional type of buy-to-let stock you would buy. Right. You go through EWS ones. I've had to face all those sorts of complications. So now they've become a hindrance. But back then, it was just a case of, look, your father says, do you know what? It's probably a good thing you've got some money saved up. Every time you save a pot, just go and buy another one. It'll be part of your pension pot. And that was as simple as it was. And I think that works to an extent back then. Nowadays, we're getting into the world of you can't do that because you need to be a business now. You need to be business minded. You can't half-arse it anymore. It's the reality. And we'll go through that, I'm sure. But that's how it started. And by the time I retired, I had 5 or 6 properties. But my wages dropped down as I went through the league. So I think most of my career, I don't mind saying, was on sort of, 80 to 100 grand, that sort of wage. Whereas when I started, I was on double to treble that for when I was 18 to 22, that sort of time. So most players have the opposite. They're starting their work and every 2 years are jumping up. Whereas for myself, it went the other way. So I had some money and I had it to, and of course, this is 10, 15 years ago. So inflation adjusted, it's very different. But I always knew I was going to retire early because my body felt so bad. Yeah. So every time I was able to build that pot, and most of my career was League 1 and 2, which is not astronomical monies, I was just putting it away. So I ended with something, and that gave me the space and time then to rely on some of the income of those assets. I had a savings pot, and then I was able to create a business rather than needing to jump into a job just to keep going at 27. So it did its job. I could have always done it better, but it did its job for me.
Fair play. And I think it's incredibly difficult for young people, especially when you're in an industry like football, whereby like everyone kind of has these dreams of kind of like making it into the Premiership, and 7-8 figure sums sometimes have been talked about. And then you've had this experience whereby you look back and you didn't enjoy it as much. I'm sure. Would you say that? Would you, if you could change anything, would you do it all over?
Oh yeah, I changed loads of things.
Would you really?
Yeah, loads of things. I definitely would change. If I had any advice now to the younger guys starting out, you learn so much about environment. I think if you can, back then I thought, well, if I start at Bristol, I'll work my way up. I would actually look at it the other way around now. I think environment's so important. You want to be around the best quality environment you can. If you could have gone, in my instance, those sort of the Evertons, the West Hams, the Aston Villas, those sorts of level of clubs, that would have changed the type of player you are, the person you are, the professionalism you have. Bristol City was good, but there was even better out there. And I think a lot of the guys maybe think it's much harder to work your way up than it is to work your way down. So that's just an honest opinion. So I would have changed lots of that. But the reality is sport is dog eat dog. It's some things go your way, some things don't. So it's every game is on a very, very fine margin. And that's just how it goes. That's the beauty of it, isn't it? Because football is, you never know who's going to win, especially if you look at the Football League especially, but Championship, League 1. every game, you don't know who's going to win. It's not like the Premiership where there's 4 at the top, 4 at the bottom, and they generally win every game. In Championship, it's any game is up for grabs. It's fantastic for that. But then there's winners and losers from that as well.
And you know, this is one of the things I love about. I always use analogies of, and that's why I'm kind of asking you about. I love football as well. I'm a Newcastle United fan. Do you support Bristol?
I've kind of support the teams I played for, basically. Rather than being a die-hard fan of somebody, I've ended up Bristol City, Oxford, Exeter. These type of teams, they looked after me pretty well. They've become the teams I follow the most now.
And is there a Premiership football team that you follow? Not really.
Not really, because I've grown up in Football League, really. You know, most of my career was Championship, going to watch those games, then playing in Championship, League 1 and 2. The Premiership was always a dream, and I never achieved it. I never managed to play there. Wales was also a dream. I managed to get a couple of caps there, which was fortunate. So no, I've been more football leagues in my blood that way.
I mean, I ask you all these questions quite selfishly. This is a property podcast, but I'm a massive football fan, and I feel very privileged to be sitting in front of an professional footballer.
That's okay.
So that's all good. But in terms of that transition into, you know, to come 27 years old, one of the things I love about being around property, sports people in particular, is for the most part, their positive mental attitude, or their ability to be very resilient through those levels of pressure. At 27 years old, you know, it finally all comes to an end. And you said it was a bit relieving, if anything.
In my particular case, it was. Not everyone feels that. There was certainly levels of the anxiety and worry and a bit of sadness, but I think it's because it's a massive change in your life. As I mentioned, that's all you've ever done. You've got to start your whole life afresh. It feels like retirement is such a strange word, because who retires at 27? You know, it's a weird thing to say, but it really is. Your whole life changes and you're taking a whole new direction, and you don't know how it's going to go. So it's for me personally, I try to think of it as a positive that I did it at 27. So now being 36, which is where most of the players are sort of mid-30s coming to the end. Well, I've had nearly 10 years of building up something else. I have friends now who are 32, 34, 36, and they're going through that stage of thinking, well, I've got 2 kids now, I've got this and that, and I haven't got anything else. And I think with what's going on in the economy right now, and there's a lot of headwinds with things we can talk about with AI and all this stuff, it's really scary, you know, with a lot of these things, what the opportunities could or couldn't be for players. So I feel quite fortunate. I went through that early, and now I've got a bit of momentum in something else, as the other guys are going to have to do that for themselves. So I've gone through it all, hence why I can give advice to players, because I really have lived through the highs and the lows and gone through that early retirement, having to create something new and rely on yourself to bring your own income in, not your own job as such. And it's become a passion of mine with it, but all the players have to face it at some point. Football will retire you. That's just a headline I'd say all day. It's going to happen. You all will face it at some point.
And then you've got to kind of confront the stark reality, which is, I need something else to do. And you found property. You could have done anything, though. You could have you could have gone into food, beverage, hospitality. You could have, and with your property, why was it property? Why not barbershops?
Yeah, well, I think first of all it was one of the things I'd had some success with, because at that point, maybe a bit different. If you have enough time, property is pretty forgiving, generally, as a rule. And property works really well against footballers' careers, because they're not relying on any of the income today. And if they're relatively clever with it, they can buy something, sit on it 5-10 years. By the time they retire, hopefully you've got good chunks of equity, some good incomes and things. So it was one of the only things that I'd been successful in. And I generally, because I was always in so much pain, I knew my career was going to end early. I was researching it a lot in my early 20s to mid 20s. So I was getting quite passionate about it. It wasn't just the fact that I had some of these things. I was really interested in it daily, because I saw it as, well, I'm going to need it soon, or I'm going to need something. I'd like to give this a go first. It's worked well for me so far. And as I mentioned, what I managed to finish with was a small portfolio of properties that had incomes from those. I think off the top of my head, about 60 to 80 grand as a savings pot. And that was my rainy day fund. So I had enough there where I had probably gave myself a year. In truth, I said, well, you've got a year to go and try something out. And I had this concept of, well, I want to help footballers not go through what I went through. So when I retired, I didn't get any insurance payout, because they deemed my injury a wear and tear, which I will never forgive the PFA and everything for, because in reality, what's not wear and tear? We're all sprinting around every day, running miles and miles. Every injury you have is a certain element of wear and tear. Mine actually finally went in my last season where I had another injury on that knee, and that pushed me over the edge then. So I tried to claim on that. So I had no insurance. So when I finished, it was very much a case in football. When you retire, you get 6 months more pay of your contract, unless you're finishing at the end of that season. But I retired about November time. Oxford were good to me. They saw out the rest of my contract, which was till next June. So I had income for 6 months, and I had this pot. I had some properties. So I thought, well, I've got myself a base to give myself a bit of breathing room to start something new. And I wanted to help players not go through what I went through, where I tell a story about I had a call from the PFA just as I retired, where I had a call which said, hi there, it's Christian Ribeiro. I said, yes. I said, look, we understand you've retired. Are you mentally okay? As in, are you depressed, whatever? And I said, well, I think I'm okay with it. I said, all right, good luck. I just put the phone down.
Wow.
And that was it. Never any more communication again. So I'm using that as an example of, and all players will have varying levels of this. You are on your own when you retire. And nowadays it might be a bit better, but you can't rely on these other, as an example, the PFA, that's Professional Footballers Association. Yeah. They're not going to build your new life for you. Also, you're going to have to face this stuff on your own. So the better you can build foundations elsewhere to soften that landing when you go off a financial cliff and all the rest of it. So many things come from financial instability. As a general rule, from the depressions, anxiety, from relationships breaking down. For example, with me, I had a fiance at that point. That broke down at that time as well. So I really did go through all the negatives that a footballer is terrified of. You know, the early career ending, an injury that you're going to have to manage forever, or the income's dropping, all of these things. I went through it all. So I felt in the right position of, well, I can give you advice. You know, all these players now and people give advice that have never experienced it. I've lived it. I've lived it all. And so I thought, well, I'll create a service where I do it for my friends, and maybe it'll grow into more where they'll not have to experience what I've had to.
Because there was this, I watched this Netflix documentary about a footballer, and they were talking about how a lot of footballers, they make good money, and then they go and put everything on credit as well. So they they get the big house, but they rent it. They get the car, but it's kind of leased or whatever. Yeah. And then so suddenly when something happens and the contract runs out or they get an injury, suddenly, they haven't actually saved much, because then they're going squandering on parties and this,
Absolutely.
that, and the other.
Well, it's a classic case of your income goes up, your expenses go up, don't they? You know, and the monies we're talking about in your early 20s especially, you lose value of money. If you're used to earning 10 grand a week at 20 years old, you don't value anything anymore. When you then realize how hard it is to earn 100 grand a year in the real world, you realize you're competing against people who are 10, 15, 20 years in that industry. They've got a lot of experience. They've taken on a lot of responsibility. Yet 100 grand a year in football is nothing. That's very difficult to accept for a lot of sportsmen, and it hits them in the face because it's a truth. And that's why I'm mentioning about these depression and anxiety things come out, because they don't really understand it until they really feel it. Yeah. So when you've got those big mortgages, you've got those big cars, it's like a noose around your neck when they actually retire. And there's stats out there with varying levels, but they're talking up to 40% of players face bankruptcy or significant financial distress within 5 years of retiring. Because that's when you're most sensitive. You know, in that first 3 to 5 years, you might have some savings. You can use mine as an example, but I couldn't live for 10 years on that. It was a small pot that would get you going, to give you a safety net. But after 5 years, you really are on your own. And normally more like 3. So I'm using that as the reality for people. I'm not expecting people to have sympathy for players, but it is just a reality that what they've actually had is a 40-year career condensed into 10 years. That's why the wages are so high. The reality for 99.9%, they'll never have that level again. Some have done amazing businesses and become multimillionaires again and billionaires and whatnot. It's not the norm. The norm is they go back down right to the bottom of the ladder, and unless they've got something to show for all that stuff, they'll never get that exposure to that opportunity again. They really do have a 10 to 15 year window of time, a window of opportunity to make the most of it. But that's, the marketplace tells them they're that valuable because they are the 0.1%. So I'm not saying they're wrong for earning that. They are
it
specialists.
Is what it is.
It just is what it is.
At 27, so you decided you wanted to help those people go through that transition. Yeah. And so was that like in a consultancy? What can you tell us the ins and outs of what that was? And are you still doing that?
Yeah. So what it started with, I thought, well, if I help players build their portfolios in the background, I'm passionate about this. I've got this connection with friends, and I was fortunate enough to playing Championship, League One, League Two, and a bit of international. I had friends that were playing the Premiership, all these high net worth guys, all still in their 20s, early 20s, mid 20s, late 20s, early 30s. So I had the connection base, but at the end of the day, and I wanted to essentially create a system where it's a conveyor belt system where players don't have to focus on anything other than having the best career possible, because ultimately they will make the most money and they playing football and being the best player they can be, and you only get that one chance. They got 10 years to realize their dreams. My sort of passion was, nobody looked after me when I was retired. I felt like I was thrown out, at the end of it. I was just tossed aside and said, well, you're of no value anymore, we're focused on everyone else. So I had that had that grit and determination to say, well, I won't swear heavily on here, but it was, one finger up to everyone else. Like, I'm going to make something of myself and I'm going to prove that you're all wrong, sort of thing. And at that time, I had the enthusiasm and a little bit of knowledge, but not a great amount of knowledge. I needed the other part of it, which was someone who's experienced, someone who had the setups and whatnot. So I was looking for that avenue. And I met my business partner while I was on a course that was I was on a development course at the time, which I should not have been on. I don't really believe in a lot of that stuff anyway. But the one thing that came of it was I met my business partner, Jay, who's based in Manchester, 10 years older. He was already a very successful businessman himself. He had a number of businesses. He then had a large portfolio of nearly 50 properties in Manchester. Right. He built a letting agency off the back of that. So combined then, I think he was at that point where he was looking for a new venture himself and maybe saw some of the enthusiasm in myself, and we partnered up on the idea of, well, let's see if we can build something here. And that's how Performance Property Group started.
And what age were you when that happened? Was that straight off 20?
So I was turning 28 when I retired, and then probably within 6 months, that first 6 months was planning it as such, and then launched that next year, really. And
did you take a long holiday beforehand? Did you go to Thailand or Bali?
I tell you what, this is absolute truth, is if you haven't got purpose, nothing matters. And what I found was, so I retired in November. My contract was still running till June, July. So that first month, as you said, leading to Christmas, I was like, well, I'm getting paid for doing nothing. This is great. After literally 4 to 6 weeks, I thought, this is awful. There's no purpose. All my friends are at work. All my friends are playing, chasing their ambitious careers. I might have the income. I know it's short term, maybe for this 8 more months. It was terrible. It taught me a real life lesson that purpose is everything. Regardless of whether you're wealthy or not, purpose drives you in life. It was huge. So I found that as soon as I went through that initial, we'll call it a honeymoon period of, my life's my own again. I don't have to get up and train at this point. I don't have to ice my knee and, sort of force myself to take painkillers every day, which I had to do for 10 years just to get through a job. But it really taught me, no matter what, you have to have purpose in anything you do. And that was the lesson. So from a couple of months maybe of slowing down, it then went into, well, what am I going to do next? And this was the next step.
So you met Jay, who's your successful businessman and now business partner. And what was the business plan?
The idea was, for portfolio building for players, starting small was start with friends, start with your closest contacts and do it that way. The concept was, we were based Stockport way, so South Manchester. The idea, and it still is today, is Greater Manchester is a great place to put your money. The investment there, it's become the London of the North, and what's happening there is effectively like a mini London, where you're having that ripple effect of all the investment, all this regeneration going on, and it's just exploding in Manchester in all varying levels. And generally, South Manchester is nicer than North Manchester. Sorry if any North Mancunians are listening, but it's true. The values are higher there. It is. So the more stock you can have there, what we've seen from going 7-8 years, that the thesis has proven true. What we've done for players, stuff that the data we have now and stuff that we bought 7-8 years ago for them, we started by using my business partner's portfolio as data. Stuff he bought in 09, 10, 11, you could see how that performed. We targeted certain types of areas, certain types of properties, started afresh and built that way. And it just started by doing it for some friends, for 4 or 5 friends. They were all championship level, maybe a little bit of League One, and then gradually it expanded. But we built it to be more of an intense service for a small amount of players rather than and sort of open. I see a lot of business which is kind of an email list of 1,000 people, send something out. I wanted it to be the opposite. I wanted it to be really handheld, very close connections. People trust you a lot. They want to do a lot of volume. So not 100 people that do one now and again. I want the guys to do 5 a year, 7 a year, 3 a year, whatever their finances can allow. And then we do our own projects as well. So we put our money where our mouth is. We use the same contractors, builders, solicitors, buy on the same streets as these guys, use the same letting agents. So I thought, well, if I can build this ecosystem out, and it's just time then, isn't it, to just prove the concept, do more and more reach and help more and more players. And that's the journey we've been on.
So at 28, what year was it?
28 was 2018. 2018, 2019, that sort of time.
Okay, so this is the new venture, and you've got some friends and family, or friends rather, that are going to do this portfolio building, and you've got a bunch of data, you know where to buy these things. And had you done like refurbs before?
So with mine, lightly.
Because
I
think,
I had small, we're talking sort of 10 grand level refurbs. I know in today's world, that might have been 20 grand,
You're doing HMOs and stuff
they
now,
were
right?
small. No, now we're doing singlets and blocks and flats and portfolios, and we'll chat on the reasons of all of that. But so I didn't have expertise in renovations. I still wouldn't call myself a renovation expert now. Just because we've done a lot, I've learned from mistakes. I've learned good and bad. I've had to bear the mistakes on things like when there's been a mistake on a place where we've paid towards it, and you learn the hard way when you do things like that, stuff on our own. And so I would never say I'm an expert in that. I would say my skill set would be more you can say more entrepreneurial, where you're doing a little bit of everything, where you're helping some of the player side of things, you're bringing in investors that way. We raise a lot of private funds for projects, you do a lot of that side. I source a lot of the projects and help that way, and then all the exits and all the refinances or the selling side, and then marketing out to new portfolios and bigger landlords. So I kind of do a little bit of everything really. And then you've got holding stuff, trading stuff, renovating. And so I wouldn't say I'm an expert in the refurb, is probably where I'm least expertise of it, but we've done enough that we've brought in a full-time project manager now as part of it. So I offload that to someone else and we just oversee from there.
Yeah. So if I was to ask you, from all of those different things that you do, the sourcing and the crunching the numbers, and then the getting the trades, and sourcing the materials, all of it, and then the letting out at the end, what is your favorite bit? If you could only do one.
Two is, I love working with players, and all the guys I've worked with, to be honest, have been great to work with. When you deliver a good service for them and how thankful they are, that's a really I don't know what the exact term is, but when you support someone like that, it makes you feel great when you do a good job. Gratifying. And you've put the time in, you really wanted to do a good job, they appreciate it. And I think now, in property, it's a long-term game. So often what you find is your hard work isn't that amazing in year one. Even if you do a good job for them, they're not going to be multimillionaires. But now we've got such a database of all the projects we've done. I can look back at the stuff 7-8 years ago and go, wow, that's pretty amazing. What you've created, and you've got 7 of them, you've got 8 of them, you've got 9. So the proof's in the pudding later on, and that's the nature of property, isn't it? It's a long-term game of it. But I do also love negotiating and bringing in new projects. That for everyone is the most exciting. What's the next thing? Sourcing.
So going out. So where do you find most of your deals? Is it through estate agents, off-market, direct-to-vendor campaigns,
a bit of
commercial
everything.
agents?
Part of the benefit of this type of business is when you do volume, it opens up the avenues to lots of different channels to work. Because if you're just doing your own projects, you might only be doing 1 or 2 a year. For the average sort of investor, it's very hard to build momentum or connection or relationships with agents, or to be able to put enough money into off-market campaigns and things if you're not doing the volume. So what we've been able to do is, by combining buying stuff for the players and that side of the service alongside our own, it then helps fund us doing all these things where we're building relationships with agents, because we're always buying and we're always selling and we're always doing something. We have all these refurbs, we normally on 8 to 12 sites at a time. So you have connections with builders, good and bad, because you still cycle through some rubbish ones. It's just the nature of the game, but you're keeping people on and you're cycling through those. And then on the sourcing side of things, from the off-market stuff, you then got enough money to start putting some real funds behind some of these strategies. And there's some things that we use where we target certain types of landlords, certain types of buildings, certain types of areas. And that then creates a little ecosystem where everyone's winning. We do our own projects for ourselves. The players get their own types of projects. The largest things of all, we co-own with some of the players. I'm sure we'll talk about where they're you're working together to buy something on a larger scale. And that's worked really well. And we're just on that journey, I guess, of getting bigger and bigger. And it's a little bit of an exponential, a graph you could have, where it took us maybe 6 months to do one terrace. You know, that first time we started to get going, it took 6 months to get something agreed for a player. And I think last year we did something like 60 to 70 units for us, which majority was our own that we held, because it's blocks of flats and portfolios. But hopefully this year then we'll get to more like 100 odd and so. And so you just got to put the time and effort in, but we're just each year gradually trying to improve that.
And so am I right or wrong in thinking that you did HMOs as well?
No, we don't do HMOs.
You've never done HMOs?
No, I owned some personally at the start and I sold them. They were small 4-bed things. But for me personally, I don't particularly like the HMO stuff. It's not that you never do it. It's more likely you'd end up buying them through buying a portfolio as such. Yeah. I think nowadays, the reality of somewhere like Manchester and most major cities now, the cost of those buildings is so high. The cost to create them is so high. I think it's pretty difficult now to make them work unless you've got your own business doing it. You're already well set. Those guys are still going. And there are guys out there building great businesses on it. For the average person, I think that market is quite hard. And I'm very wary of this commercial valuation stuff.
Especially up in the north. I
think I was literally with an allied surveyor yesterday, because at the minute, or Wednesday, we're doing a lot of refinances on blocks and portfolios. So they're the same types of mortgages, slightly different, and as you know, so you're with the same surveyors all the time. So I'm always asking, how are you valuing things? What are you seeing? I want to get the cutting edge of, well, what are you valuing in these areas? And what they're always saying to me is how people are trying to, the surveyors now are stretching their yields because people are trying to get these values too high. They don't like it. They can already see where there's sensitive areas. They're trying to get 700 grand valuations on rows of 300 grand terraces. It's to me, it's a bit business. It's a little bit of a bubble that's in this system that hasn't exploded yet. But I'm not saying there's not demand for rooms. I'm saying that's an area I don't want to be involved in really. And I think, there's some good of it because it allows you to scale. I get all that. But I think for the guys who are sort of doing one or two here and there, I think it's a risk you don't need to take on. There's businesses that are doing great off it. I'd leave them to it. It's not for me, I don't think.
I agree. I do. I think it's a risky business. I think you've got to be, if you are going to do it, you've got to be very aware of how it all works.
I think the reality is a lot of people, as we talk about this age group, is a lot of people haven't experienced a real downturn yet. I can include myself in some of that from my age. But my business partner was 10 years older. So he went through 08 and he knows what it was like when people were literally, their banks were, forcing their costs up to try and repossess people, and people were throwing their keys back. We've not really experienced it. We know we've had some wobbles in COVID and Liz Truss, and we'll talk how that affected us. But not the real, where banks say, because when you go onto these commercial mortgages, it's a different exposure. These guys can revalue it like that. It's the same on our blocks. If they think, actually, we think you're too stretched, you're 10% over, we want 10% of that. Well, if it's 700 grand and you've got 10 of them, you're going to have to find a lot of money pretty quickly. And that's where things really snowball.
Thank you so much for tuning in. We really, really appreciate the support. And it gives me the motivation to get bigger and better guests on, all for you. I also wanted to let you know that I do have another YouTube channel. It's called Saam Lowni. It's just my name, and it's all about everything that I've learned in property and business over the last 20 years. It has site visits from our Merrioaks clients, so you can go behind the scenes and see how they're getting on with their projects and the trials and tribulations, the successes that they've had, as well as some tips on my thoughts about the market, about the game of Monopoly, and a whole bunch of other things that bounce around in my head. We have the Monday morning musing, which I do send out on an email as well. But please do check out the YouTube channel at Saam Lowni. We'll have the link in the show notes because that's slightly different stuff, and I'm sure you'll enjoy that too. Otherwise, back to the episode.
I think a lot of the guys who are in their 20s and 30s haven't really experienced that yet. And I'm touch wood, we don't experience it anytime soon, but it's likely to happen at some point. We don't know when. And that's why you want to be careful where you're positioned as well. So that's just a comment I would make. And the way I've leveraged against that is having a business partner who's 10 years older, who makes you think of things I wouldn't have thought of. And it challenges me when I say, oh, this would be quite exciting to do it this way. It's like, but does it work at this amount of interest rate? We were doing stress testing at 5 and 6% back when they were at 3% rates. And back then I was saying, but they're 3%, they're 3.5%. It works at this. It's like, but what if the rate goes up? well, it hasn't gone up for 10 years. It's never going to go. You're in that mentality. That's normal. And look what's happened.
Yeah. It's always going to go one way. I mean, you know what? I bought a bunch of HMOs, and for the most part, they've been good, but they have been a lot of work as well. I can't lie.
And it's the utilities and things like that. Hence why now people are switching to more of the leases and side of things. But that opens up a whole new other things. That's not a holy grail. I think with anything, the reality is nothing is perfect. If you want lower yield and more capital growth, you go higher yield, less growth, all this stuff, you go all the cities. You can't have everything. You've got to pick a little bit of what you think is right for you. If you're going a bit more on the income side of things, a bit more on the slower for the growth side. But I think most things can work. But the reality is, I think you need to make it a business now. I just don't think that time of
the accidental landlord,
50 grand, 100 grand, 200 grand, I'll just buy a few things like that and I'll be all right. I don't think that now. I think I use the term, because it's similar to our businesses, you go big or go home now. And I'm not sure where that level sits as a threshold, whether it's having 5 properties, 10 properties, 20 properties. I'm not sure exactly where I would sit on that. But I feel quite strongly. I'm more every day.
I agree with you.
I feel more that way.
With you.
So I speak to players and they'll contact me a lot of the time. And most people I speak to have between 100 and 500 grand generally. And one of the questions I ask, because they often say I'd like to do it, and I say, look, if you're thinking of just doing one because they've got a financial advisor that controls all their money, they don't like them doing property because they don't get paid from it. It's the reality. I'm saying that now because I've had a few challenges with the financial advisors, we'll put it that way. Some are good, some are not so good. But I just say, look, I wouldn't bother if you're just doing one. And it's not me. It's me turning away business a lot of the time.
Yeah.
But the reality is, I generally don't think, unless you're going to be in this for the next 10, 15 years and you're gradually going to build something up, fine. Otherwise, I wouldn't do it. It's a serious game now.
My brother actually asked me the other day about doing some development. I was like, yes, saying the same thing. Even if you want to do, you've really got to be all in on it. If you just want to do the odd flip or just do a little project here and there, you've really got to know your stuff.
I think it's time to market as well, isn't it? So I wouldn't be going near developments out of the ground now, as an example, unless you are very experienced, have your own teams, fine. You're mitigating your risks there. But this time of the market, to me, is all about asset management is the opportunity right now, which is buying stuff off landlords that are unloved, that hasn't been performing very well, trying to buy in bulk. So I think that's where the tide's shifting. That side of the market is moving. And then you don't have to do all these heavy refurbs to the same extent, because refurbs are expensive now. That margin is getting squeezed all the time. So you still find them, but there's less of those opportunities around. I think asset management is the big play at the minute.
I agree with you. I was just like the last person that was here, Adam, he asked me what would I do in property. And right now I like just anything that's asset management, which is very minimal on, it's like more paperwork plays.
Absolutely. And it's... So having the letting agency is a big part of that for us. So we focus now more on the blocks of flats, which effectively is a mini portfolio. It's just single lets on steroids. It's just 5 in a building, 10 in a building, 15 in a building. And what you're doing there is generally, as you see a lot of, landlords have had rents 10, 20, 30, 40% under rented over time. They've not kept up with them. The quality of those units are gradually degrading over time. But the building's there. It's already set. And for our job is, well, I'm not building a block of 14. It's already in the ground. All I've got to do now is asset manage it. It's a slow process because people think some of the blocks we own now they're probably worth 2 million quid each, some of them, where they're 14 in a unit, 16 or 7 and things. But what you find is you don't really get paid at the start. Asset management is like changing direction on an oil tanker. You can't just change it like that. It takes time. So when you take on something, I can give examples of some of the blocks where the rent roll would have been just over 100 grand on this block of 14. But by the end of year, 18 months in, it's at 160, 170 grand. Now it's 180. But it takes almost 2 years to get paid, and start seeing that. People don't understand that. They think, oh, you've got this amazing building, that's great. Reality is you're putting into it all the time. But as long as you can see the end goal, that's a very efficient use of your time. If you think you're just focusing on one building, you've got all the value in one place, all your teams, all your management and maintenance all focus on one, then you just got to have the skill set to be able to turn that around and then manage it for the next 10, 20 years. I think that is a really good opportunity at the minute.
Absolutely. And I like very much what you're saying. And I happen to agree, especially from where I am as well. I mean, I have a day job. I run a finance brokerage day to day. So for me, I need the just getting backwards and forwards on site and stuff. It just feels a little bit of a pain at the moment. So to you though, what does a good deal look like? So you mentioned kind of like taking the.
Yeah.
Is there a metric and returns wise? Is it 20% on profit on cost, like a development? Is there a certain yield?
I don't know if this is just me. Maybe it's. I find when you're in property long enough, almost like some of the terms give you a bit of the ick. Don't know when people say stuff like it's got to be ROI this and top. Actually, I think it's a bit of a blended. I don't use one metric. Is what I'm trying to say. If you speak to someone like an Adam Lawrence, he gives you. He's the best of all. Giving you. If you just use one metric, or if someone says ROI, they're not really thinking big picture. Because, as an example, an ROI of 10%, 15%, 20%. Well, what if one's in Scotland, one's in London, one's in Manchester? There's a value difference to that to me for it to be in Manchester. What's that worth as a percentage? There's so much more to consider than just a percentage number. And what's the reality? Does it actually give you that a year later? Rod Turner talks about that all the time. When you look back from a year, in a year's time, 2 years' time, you look back and go, when you were saying you were going to get 10% or 12%, you actually got 6. You actually got, that's the reality a lot of the time. So you've got to have I've tried to always pitch myself around guys who are 10, 20 years older, so they give you that type of advice rather than the social media, I'm earning X amount and this and that. It's all rubbish. It is rubbish. The earnings are by being skillful, asset managing that stuff up in value. You're constantly reinvesting, you're constantly managing it, but time is good to you in this, from the devaluation of your debt, from rents rising generally, being in good areas. That's why Greater Manchester, in my opinion, is still one of the best markets to be in. There's so much demand there and growth. So if you say to me, what's a good deal? Well, for me, we only buy in Greater Manchester. For players, they're generally doing single lets, and we do some renovation projects. Sometimes they're not heavy renovations. The opportunities are usually coming through off-market means, through agents, through our letting agency, things like that, where there's a reason something's coming to me. It might have had a sale fall through, we pick it up, there's a discount for a player, great. Sometimes we manufacture an uplift with a renovation, but not always. And for our own, we generally trade more, whether that's trading in auction or doing it to sell it, doing up to sell it. I call that a flip. So I've got it set under the same umbrella. But that's part of our income and how we build our pot for capital and have our own wages. And then we have the other stuff where we buy and hold, where it's our own biggest things, which are the portfolios of blocks of flats, either co-owned with players or ourselves. So then we've got a few different avenues there. So
you co-invest with the players
some of the
as well?
Players, yeah.
It's so like a bigger thing.
Yeah. So
give us an example of what might be a bigger thing.
The very first one we did was a few years ago. Was a block of 14 flats and 2 commercial in Stockport. There, that came about from a £1 letter. It's amazing. Why. Don't underestimate how powerful the simple things are, and simple things done with repetition. People give up so quickly on a lot of this stuff, and I'm not saying I'm perfect, but it would be crazy if I showed you the value of how much has come from £1 letters. It's mental. So in that scenario was a block of 12 2-beds and 2 1-beds, 2 commercial that were let already in an area. We had a really, really good area, just badly managed. The owners they'd moved out to Dubai. They were really not looking after this building at all. It had a prohibition order on it from the fire brigade, which was... off the time, I can't remember all of it, but there was a list of works. It was probably about 60 grand's worth of work or so. But so what happened was we agreed a price on it, and then it ended up breaking down in communications. They were abroad. They were really difficult to deal with. But we knew who one of the safety officers were that was attending. It was part of this prohibition order. So we stayed in contact with them. So 8, 9, 10, 12 months down the line, we still stayed in contact, and he said, they haven't done the work. So this is going to happen at some point where they're going to shut this building down. And so we stayed in contact and kind of managed to reignite that conversation. We had a Zoom call with them, and it was about 1.35 million. And they said, look, you've got 9 working days to complete. So we'd already done some work on it in the meantime, but it was very much a case of, you've got this, otherwise it's going elsewhere, sort of things. And it was like, shit, this was a big step up for us, because we were doing lots of volume on the single stuff, but this was the first time stepping up.
Multi-unit,
but we did it. We bought it with one of our players who put in some equity, and we raised 7 figures ourselves privately, and we bought it with cash. And then
amazing.
So then it was like, right, now we've got this shit show. How do we turn it around? And then it was, letting agency coming on board, taking on the management side. We didn't even know for 100% certainty which ones were tenanted, which ones weren't. We'd been in some of the flats, but some of them we couldn't get in. They were all identical, so we knew it wasn't like some were half the size of the others. The building,
and ASTs and stuff.
We had all of that, but at the time, off the top of my head, there was 14 flats. Maybe 8 of them were tenanted, 6 were not, which we had no idea. So what we did, like we always do, we go in and gradually upgrade those units that are vacant, put new tenants in. Back then, they had rents at like 550, 575.
How much are you getting now?
Now they're like 900 each, all of them. I mean, it's like a 50% increase on all these.
Yeah.
And the commercials were... One of them was wanted to leave. We ended up paying him $3,000, and they left. And now someone else went in there. A new one's taken on now. But there's about $3,000 in the commercial element of it a month that comes in. And we just had a valuation recently. At the start, so a year ago today, the valuation came in. The residential upstairs was valued at 1.9, which is fantastic. And we've left the commercial unencumbered. So it's got $36,000 a year coming. So I would say maybe 350 to 400 grand there. And that's just, we haven't spent 500 grand doing it up. We've just been, every time someone moves out, we upgrade it and gradually worked our way around that building. So
Very
that
smart.
sounds great that way. But I'll tell you the negative side of all this story was, whilst we were doing all of that,
Just interrupting this episode to let you know
.6 months down the line, the usual idea is, well, after 6 months, we'd like to try and access some cheaper finance by going on to regular products, because a lot of it was private finance. It was higher rates from high net worths that we knew.
Which is always around bridging aids anyway.
Exactly.
Like
it was about 10%, roughly,
10%.
as an idea. And at the time, products were at 4%, for that sort of thing. It's like, it's a big difference to get it. As we were going through the valuation process, Liz Truss happened and that sort of thing.
Happy days.
So everything just shut down. It wasn't even a conversation. It was just the whole market just seized up. And we're doing these big, multi-free unit blocks and products. Well, that's the first thing that gets taken off the shelf because it's weird and, it's a bit more risky. So that was gone. So what we ended up doing is having to sit on that finance for longer. Actually, this is a benefit of having business partners with capital and whatnot. The reality was one of our largest private investors in that block had about 800 grand or so in that block. He had a first charge on it. He was one of the largest holders. We replaced that with some of my business partner, put those funds in from his portfolio properties. And he became on a higher rate. He did get that because he had to refinance for it. But that kept the building, it kept it running. The beauty of this model was we had income all this time. What reality was, the building just funded itself. So that by then it was probably on 150 grand a year, 160 grand a year. So I didn't take any money out of it, but the building was having that money coming in,
asset managing,
and it was just asset managing. So all those extra interest costs, I just put it as delayed gratification. I wasn't earning a penny. None of us took a penny out of it, even though we created that equity uplift. We knew the building was worth a lot more, but from an income point of view, it was just servicing the debt, and then the management, a bit of maintenance, whatever. And that was for a year or two then, and then we got the remortgaging, and now we've had changes with it, but now it's at higher rates and on higher values that we've created. Higher income producing properties in there, the units. So now we've got some income from it. That's really powerful. And that was a bit of a confidence booster that we've done it on the small scale. Now we can do it on a decent size scale. Well, how can we go bigger? And last year we did a £3.3 million portfolio. That was 31 units. Same concept. Undervalued, under-rented. There's a few blocks in there and some individual units, and did the same thing. That had a rent roll of 250 grand of it. But now we're better than we are before. We've got better teams, better systems. Within 8 months, we got that. Now it's at 336,000 from today. We haven't owned it a year yet. It's a massive percentage increase just by negotiations we had with tenants. Certain people moved in and out. Wow. Half of that was leased to a housing association. Within one conversation, they were paying 60 grand a year for a building. It was a block of 10. And that conversation, we knew it was way under rented. They agreed 105. So just
Wow,
because they were
what a
under rented,
jump.
we knew they agreed it, as in because that was the rates, that the area is.
Yeah, why pay more if you can pay less? But if no one asked, then
But
why
look,
would you?
the reality was the owners were distant. They didn't look after it very well. They were high net worth themselves. So that to me is the opportunity I see right now. Is the unloved stuff. It's not easy. Sometimes when we talk here and we talk numbers, it sounds easy. It's not been easy, and we've had to put loads in. And I'm not saying it's
I can
life-changing,
appreciate that.
huge amounts of income. The sums are large, but we bought the company in that one, so we had great savings on the stamp duty side of things at that sort of level. But as you know, when you're buying shares of a company, you have higher finance costs. There's less lenders of that. So the model on that big portfolio is we've bought it at a good discount. It's worth now probably about 4 to 4.2, that sort of region. So we've only got about 2.4 of mortgage. It's with Shawbrook on that. And so we're at 60% or 55, 60, and we'll just leave it. We're not trying to squeeze everything. We own that with a couple of players. And we just said that's part of our pension pot now, is we're just going to let that ride out in one of the biggest block of 14 there in Stockport. That's on a 2-year product. So in a year's time, we'll reaccess that. The average rate is it was high because this was about a year ago. It's in the mid 6s for that portfolio. So we're paying a lot on interest. So it's not like we're earning tons of income. What
was the
today.
rate? Do you remember what the rate was?
It was a Shawbrook for the whole thing. It's about 6.5 on average across it all. Yeah. Because it's it's a block of 14, block of 10, and 7 individual flats, and they're freehold unit blocks. And but it took nearly 2 years in legals to get through. So as you can imagine, prices now are a little bit cheaper. We probably could have got it a bit cheaper, but that finance product was more like 18 months ago. So that was just the going rate.
Because I literally had somebody call me, a lender today, saying they've got a rate of 5% with a 2% arrangement fee. It's only up to 65% LTV, but that's pretty good for a multi-unit freehold block.
That's a really good product. Great product. To me, that's what I want. The next product, the model I said to the players is, look, guys, we can buy all this stuff, control this asset. I know we've got the teams to asset manage it all. We've baked in all this equity that we've got because we bought it at a discount. We'll manufacture the equity by increasing the rents across it all and all the rest of it. But it's delayed gratification. The real earnings will come after year 5. In reality, when we get off these products, we might, if rates drop suddenly significantly, which I don't think they will, then maybe we might break some ERCs and go early. But I don't think so. Probably half the loan is is on a 2-year product on that biggest block. So that's one that we'll be able to access early. And we would go to your YBS and all the rest of it that are cheaper, and suddenly you go from 6.5 to 5. If you've got that, might be a £1.2 million loan. That's a big difference. It's all bottom line, isn't it? So I'm just explaining that as the realities of you can own this big portfolio stuff, but you're not necessarily a multimillionaire overnight earning tons of money. It's always feeding into that asset.
Delayed
all
gratification, which is a skill. It's an attribute that not many people have, because in this days of like instant, immediate gratification, where you kind of want the dopamine kick from a like on your social media or an extra bite of a chocolate bar or something, it's hard to have that delayed gratification discipline.
And I'd say combining that with the players, the guys who own that with us are sort of around the early 30s, late 20s. It's perfect for them. It's part of their portfolio. Bear in mind they own other stuff. When it really starts optimally performing, they'll be wanting it. That's when they'll want their income. But we'll have owned it for 5 years by then. We might be 350 grand of gross rent roll, but our average blended rate might get down to 5% by then. That's a big difference when you've got 2.4 on there and you've got 2 million of equity. So to me, that's how I look at those. The big asset management plays on the biggest stuff. It's just single lets on steroids, but bulk allows you to have more opportunities because less people doing that. There's more opportunities for discount. There's more opportunities to multiply those equity gains, those rental gains. So it's that to me is the exciting bit at the minute we're working on.
And you live in Gloucestershire, but you go up to Great Manchester. Well, how long is it a drive?
Yeah, well, it's 2 hours 15, 2 hours 20 to get to. We're based more Stockport.
With or without traffic?
Oh, without traffic, or a tiny bit of traffic, put it that way.
With
because
traffic?
I'm just off the M5. With traffic,
3 hours.
Can be 3, yeah. But I go super early when I go up generally, and I try, if I'm going home and it takes 3, I get calls done and whatnot. But I moved to Manchester 2020, just in COVID.
So you did move to
so I moved there for 5 years. Yeah, just under 5 years. And then once I had my daughter, I came back down closer to family.
I see.
So that makes sense. just over 12 months, about 14, 15 months.
I thought for the last 7 years you've been going back with
No, I was up full
crazy.
time. How it started, the first 2 years, I was put up with by my business partner. So I'd go up, stay 3 nights that week, go up, stay with him. We'd run around, speaking to agents, doing all the stuff you have to do when you start, which is get momentum, get known in the areas. I think everything, especially in property game, the way I see it, you want to try and dominate an area as such, and you've got to get out and do it. You've got to, at the start, you've got to get uncomfortable and go out and meet these people, contact them, prove your concept all the time, never fail to complete, all this sort of stuff. You had to be there. And now it's slightly different. I'm still there, but I don't have to be there quite as much.
Your relationship with your business partner, because, people go to these property events or wherever you might go to suddenly decide that I'm going to do business with you. And that's quite, because the previous guy I was just talking to, he's a business partner with his mate from uni, so they've got to go out together. And they not many people do joint ventures or form a company with people that they've just met or haven't got a long-term relationship with. They either don't last very long or it ends horribly.
Yeah. Look,
how lucky have you been?
I think there's luck. I think there is luck of that, and I think good people meet and you get a feel for people as well. I'd like to think that I'm a good person to work with. And so to me, it was almost a case of, well, I had this one opportunity. I had this time, I had this drive to create something. I think with Jay, our philosophies aligned, we did things when we first started talking about creating a business where you do talk about what are your real values and all this. We did this together because Jay's 10 years older. He's exact same mindset. He's got a couple of other businesses with business partners. So he already had long-term proven track record, being good to work with, just a good starting point, isn't it? But we did that. I remember being in Manchester in Ancoats, having meetings with him for the first time, putting big sheets of paper in front of ourselves and writing down what are your values. And then we would talk about it together and say, do we align as people? So we did some, I've forgotten that. That's an interesting, you brought that memory up. But there was that element at the start. Now look, it can still go horribly wrong, but you start small, don't you? You start small and you build big. It up. Exactly. And you put day in after day, hour after hour, and eventually you grow into more and more. And I hope we can continue to keep growing. I've got some lofty goals with it that I'm hoping that we can achieve. And we're only really getting going now. I see the next 5-10 years, that's the big play now.
And is the lofty goals all within Greater Manchester, your core competence? Have you ever thought about going to Leeds, Newcastle, London?
It would have to be big enough. And I don't mean that as in, that sounds ginormous when you said, but as in, I wouldn't go for a 2-bed terrace to Leeds.
But a block or something.
But if it's a big portfolio, something potentially, what's probably more likely, and we're already doing this kind of now, is you'll probably end up doing some more portfolio work in Greater Manchester, and you'll have offshoots of that where they'll have some properties here and there dotted about, whether big or small, and then you'll have to do it. But Abode, I'll let an agency can manage from afar. They manage my stuff in Bristol because a lot of that can be done from afar generally. So it's not impossible. I just think Manchester is such a good market. There's so much more growth to be had there, and not just growth, it's downside protection, isn't it? If everything goes wrong and then we have terrible economy downturn, you want to be near powerhouse cities like that and demand and growth. And you look at Manchester, and I just think it's got all these boxes ticked.
Well, Bristol is also
it's just the price point, isn't it? Bristol's amazing, but you're starting from a different entry level. Right. And for what you're doing on the buy-to-let side and things, Bristol would be great to have a big portfolio, but you're talking about potentially treble the price as Manchester for a lot of stock. And so that entry level is just different. But Manchester has probably only got 5-10 year window before it gets more of a southern city level, and then that window will be shut. So for the players that listen, to this now potentially, that's kind of my mindset was always, you might have a 15-year window of this. It's like do as much as you can.
All businesses always have that kind of window, the opportunity to have the wormhole.
Exactly, and just put as much time and effort as you can, build it as best you can. But I do think you'll be rewarded for that on the asset side, because
this episode is sponsored by Merry Oaks Property Finance Brokerage. Merry Oaks is a finance brokerage for investors, developers, landlords, SMEs across the country, helping you with all of your finance needs. So whether it's bridging, development, commercial, buy-to-lets, HMOs, service accommodation, industrial, hotels, the whole 9 yards, whether it's for your portfolio, whether it's for your business, we can support you. Please contact us. We've got the link in the show notes, and we look forward to hearing from you. Now, back to the episode.
I just think Manchester's not going to get up and go anywhere anytime soon. And so I'm really big on that, because I know some guys chase the deal more, and there's strengths and weaknesses of both. But to me, I think that is much harder to prove long term that you can do it.
It's less scalable.
It's when you buy things all over the place because they're cheap. Why are they cheap? Generally, is the first question. When I'm in Greater Manchester, I can know those reasons. I know I can solve. I can solve 99% of those reasons. There's only a handful that I wouldn't touch for certain reasons. When you go into other areas, you're opening up yourself to other sorts of risks. And as we've mentioned, when you start doing blocks and big portfolios, you're opening yourself to much more exposure. When you've got those massive PGs and you've got commercial products on these, which they can switch on you whenever, it's a different game. And I mention that because people forget the level you're playing at. Hence why I mentioned that portfolio, and same with the other block of 14. Part of the model is not to over leverage. You bake in your equity, and I'm not trying to leverage it back up for more to get more capital out of it. Now let's let it settle down, because what if we have a downturn of 10% in 2, 3, 4, 5 years for whatever reason? I want it to be sat at 60% and whatnot. That's a model I want our players to agree on. If they come to me and say, no, Chris, I want to cycle everything all the time, I want my money on this, I say, you're not the right partner. We're not on the right mindset. I don't believe in it that way. I think it's a slower term game. But I want to be still in this game in 10 years' time, in 20 years' time. And I think there's not enough spoken about that. But if you speak to, I'll use these guys because they're two of my inspirations, really. And it is Adam Lawrence and Rod Turner. We were part of the boardroom club for a year or so, because that's what they talk all about, is this, because they've been through the life cycles of us, and their mentality is not judging on what percentage below market value something is. What a load of nonsense that is. It's all subjective, isn't it? It doesn't mean anything to me. That if someone says to me that, I just shrug my shoulders. It doesn't mean anything to me. There's so much more to it than that.
I agree. Adam's been on recently, and we just launched this episode, and then Rod was the second person I ever interviewed for.
Really? Brilliant.
So it's one of the not very good productions, but he's still there if you want to go check it out. But both of those guys, super smart, very intelligent, very experienced, and just generally nice, down to earth human beings.
That's the best of all, isn't it?
Isn't it?
That's why I mentioned I listen everything they put out. I listen to. I would never say I'm an expert in it. I'm putting my money where my mouth is, and I'm putting my time where I promise it is. Where what the stuff the players are buying into and what I preach about it. We're doing the exact same thing. We're
putting where your money where your mouth is.
So I think that is the best thing you can possibly do for a trust element of things. Because I know there's a lot of businesses out there where act more as a broker, where they're just sort of combining, especially in the footballing world, these guys go in and just say, look, buy this, it's a new shiny block of flats elsewhere, and they're getting paid from the developer and all this stuff. I think, well, to me, I don't believe in that model, really, to be truthful. I think this is the harder way to do it. It's harder to scale, but I think it's the right way to do it. And so we'll suffer that I won't be able to ever service maybe 100 players at a time, because it probably wouldn't be possible. But I think I can help good people do some really good things. And we get to benefit as well. We get to do our own projects. We're benefiting by owning the big stuff together. I think everyone can build something powerful then. And we only have a small window of time. I really do believe that.
I think the way that you're doing it, because it's interesting, I do know from time, like not directly, but people that have dealt with footballers, and you're right, they do kind of say, hey, go and buy this new build apartment, go and buy this thing off plan, and they are parking capital. It's not the end of the world, but I think the way you're doing it, which is forcing value through kind of expertise and finding deals and making a margin on the way in, all that sort of stuff, is the harder way to do it, and you make more overall. And with the right pair of hands, I absolutely agree with you. I think it is
a large part that came from my business partner explains his experience of 08. And what happened in Manchester, a lot of it, and we'll use it as an example, they built so many blocks of flats, all bought by Asian investors, Middle East, all this stuff. So when there was a downturn, everything was owned by investors in these blocks that we've just spoken about. Everyone was trying to exit at the same time. Prices dropped. You're talking like 40%, 50%. But the 3-bed semis in nice suburban areas of Manchester where families just sort of rode it out, they might have dropped 15%, 10%. So in that terrible situation...
That's a very good point.
People don't think that. And that's why I mentioned having that... I'm not saying foresight is the wrong word, but people who are 10 years older, they really experience that. So they think about it when they're doing these things. And so for the players side of things, I sort of urge them to think of this stuff. And I know guys now who've lost some serious money and stuff that's gone wrong, or they've committed to buying stuff off plan, and they speak to me and say, I can't get out of it now. I've already put 100 grand down, 50 grand. I have to go through it. I wish I didn't. And it might be all right. Some will go okay. But then a lot of it, the reality is, do people really care about where they're putting your money? They don't. They're just.
Do you ever do anything racier like crypto?
What do I think of crypto? I like the concept of crypto. 99% of it is rubbish, and it's just a scam, a lot of it. But the power of blockchain is really exciting, and what that can do to property. And because I think that is going to look at property as it's so ancient, isn't it, in so many parts. So I think the exciting bits I foresee in the crypto side are tokenization of all assets we're talking about in a minute, and when that comes to real estate, which we're all talking about, which I don't know when that will be. That's really exciting. I don't know what that's going to look like, but in my head at the minute, and tell me if this is wrong, but when you start to own all these assets and you can start to split these assets down into 100 different pieces, what does that mean for your finance side? What does that mean to the value side? I don't quite fully understand yet how
people are still working out. I'm still not 100% clear.
What could be powerful is you could, let's say a house is split into 100 pieces. You might only need 5 of those pieces to own that house, or to own control of that house, which is similar to a mortgage but different because it might need less. And equally is borrowing. What about stable coins when they start creating all of these? And what if they're able to create that at a lower rate of yield? And so what if you can borrow at 3% because it's from a stable coin? Well, what's going to happen to mortgages? Can I put this on a mortgage? Because that is a lot of the talk, isn't it, about when those mortgages going to come in, like a Bitcoin backed mortgage or whatever. So I'm interested in it. A lot of it's rubbish, and I've dabbled in bits before and lost generally.
But there is some.
I think it's more the blockchain. There's something going to happen there. We just don't know when. I'd like to think it's going to be really beneficial if you own assets, because it's going to open a new world of finance. I'm hoping it'll certainly potentially open things like NFTs to have all your title documents and everything. So you can transact on a property like that. You can just say, oh, it's 100 grand, it's X amount of USDT. And I just sign it there. You send me the documents, it's mine now. That is going to happen. It will happen. It's just when,
And what about AI? Do you use it for your deal analysis or for sourcing or anything?
I do a bit. I think, to be honest, I'm not sure how helpful AI is at the moment in this type of property sphere, because it's a people's game. A lot of negotiation is a people's emotional connection, really, when you're talking. Yes, you can use some of it for helping you with, as you mentioned, facts and figures, some data and things. It's brilliant at that. But I think you're dealing with people a lot of the time, and I'm not sure AI has the power in that, and I don't think it ever will, really, until the main thing I think is AI is the biggest risk I see in property is AI, because of what's going to happen with jobs. That, to me, is ultimately the biggest risk of all the things we're doing. So the way I've thought we're mitigating that is staying in the lower barrier to entry type of housing. So even when we own these big blocks, yes, we might own a £2 million block but they're split up into 14 different units that are all worth 120 grand each, whatever. So the reason I say that is, what if the worst comes to worst in AI in general, AGI comes in the next 5 to 10 years, because it's not far away potentially, and we start losing all these jobs. Well, how can they afford their rents? How can, where are they going to want to be in the country? So my ways of mitigating are, well, you want to be at levels where if everyone goes onto this universal basic income, which is probably a reality, isn't it? At some point, and that's going to grow, you want your rents to be able to be near that, and that's going to go up, isn't it? So if you're on luxury quality buy-to-lets, example, maybe in London, I use an example, and they're paying £5 a month. Well, that's going to be a giant jump if you go back down to LHA rates or whatnot. Whereas in Manchester, I use that conversation I mentioned with that housing association. Well, they agreed to rent those one beds we've got. They're renting at $850. Well, that's pretty much the going rent at the minute for them. The LHA rate is $775, I think, in that area of Manchester. They basically gave 10% above LHA. So in my head, I'm always thinking, well, what if worse comes to worse? Where can you mitigate your risks? Because you've got these big loans, you've got these big commitments. What if all my tenants lose their job? Where does it sit? And I think that's why playing in those areas, you're protecting yourself on the downside as well, rather than going for huge penthouses and all this stuff. I know it sounds a bit extreme, but I think we have to think of that.
Absolutely.
It's not that far away.
And no one exactly knows what it's going to be like, but it's going to be all of the above. Everyone's imagination, wherever it can go, it can be exactly that.
I'll give you an example. We had 2 tenants apply for a terrace house we have literally last week. One was a software engineer on 45 grand a year, something like that. The other was a doctor, and 2 nurses. It was a partnership of partners, and we turned down the software engineer because we see that job as more at risk of AI.
Wow!
So that is an exact case in point of, as a landlord, we had 2 options there, both good options. In fact, they were earning less. This other couple,
you can imagine,
they were on 37 or whatever. This was 45, and the point was, I think that job's at risk. That's scary, isn't it, when you say that out loud? Because that's never been the case before. You would have always chosen the other way.
Exactly.
So I know different sectors are different, but look, that's just an example.
To consider, take into consideration. Well, I'm going to do a quick fire round.
Go for it.
So, what's the first thing you thought this morning?
First thing I thought this morning. How tired I was because my daughter was ill last night. So I only got about 2 or 3 hours sleep. So I was thinking, I'm coming on this podcast and I'm going to look horrendous with bags in the mouth. I was thinking, the lighting's going to be horrific. But yeah, mate, so I woke up just, when you just, I haven't even got to sleep yet. But there we go.
That's very sweet of you to make the trip nevertheless.
No, it's all good.
Someday you could have just phoned in sick.
Yeah. No, I'm fine. You battle on. It's always...
What did you have for breakfast?
Eggs on toast, always. I'd go to gym first thing, so 6 till 8, I'm at the gym, so eggs on toast, always.
So you're near with the gym and everything?
I'm really big on routine and exercise. That's just like a non-negotiable.
So how do you do, how do you take into consideration with your needs? You just do walking on the treadmill?
I do warm-up stuff, and I generally do lifting weights. So I do a lot of legs and uppers, not to be as in muscle building size, more for... I want to have a pain-free life. Unfortunately, that sounds a bit depressing when you say it, but when you have these sorts of injuries, that is a reality. I gym because I need to, because if I don't, my knee will get worse. And it was awful in my career. So it's a non-negotiable. And exercise is so important for you. I've had to do it all my life. It's not work for me. It's a discipline. It's a part of my values. If I don't exercise, I feel sluggish. I feel rubbish. It's a non-negotiable.
Same. What's your favorite emoji?
Favorite emoji? Laughing, crying face.
I've read that a couple of times today. Very good.
Yeah. All thumbs up when it's usually if something's gone away, it's like, I can't be bothered. Yeah, it's good enough. Move on to the next problem.
If you could ask me one question, what would it be?
I was going to ask you a question, which might be more off air, about some of the projects we have coming up, if you'd be interested in having a look at, because I think the stuff that you're doing, you're very experienced on a lot of these, and we've got some coming up that definitely could do with potentially your eye looking at. So
by all means, that would be very kind. What's the best bit of advice you've ever received?
Best bit of advice I've ever received? You put me on the spot there, because I've had so many, but I think I'm going back to my footballing days now of it. I think one of the concepts I always had, football is so up and down that you have to find a way. I use this term, I've used this term for myself, I've coined it from someone else, which was, we go again. And I use that because the clock doesn't stop, whether you've had a good day or bad day. And in football, it's so emotional, and especially in football in the UK, if you lose, it's the end of the world. And when I look back, who cares when I was playing for Oxford in League One? It didn't matter at all. But I use that as an example of, it was everything. It was your everything. All day was surrounded by that. Having a term of we go again means don't get too high, don't get too low. What matters is your discipline, your routine, the non-negotiables, the values of your life. I keep going with it. And I'm not saying I was perfect at it, and I definitely had my confidence knocked in loads of different ways, but I use that term in business now, because business is just a sport of the mind. It's just, it's not football anymore. You can't use my body, so I have to use this instead. Sometimes I have good days, I have bad days, but I'm generally learning all the time. But we go again is a bit of a mantra of mine, because no matter how bad that day is, you're going to go on to the next thing, and you just... It's a relentless pursuit, isn't it?
Exactly. Very, very good. And I can see that kind of positivity coming through you, and sometimes you have to have that resilience.
Yeah, for sure.
What's the worst bit of advice you've ever had?
Worst bit of advice? That's a really tough question, actually. I'm not sure. Worst bit of advice? There's loads of specific footballing advice and things, but do you know, I'll use a specific one that was to me. And I use an advice that, I love my father to death, he's my hero, but there was some advice he gave to me near the start of my career, which was, when you listen to people who are outside of sphere of expertise, so I'm using that as in, he wasn't an expert in football, he's a footballing man, but he's not an expert in football, and he was giving advice of things like, I'll use an example, near the end of my Bristol City career, I had the opportunity to stay and fight for my place, and deep down, that manager that was there at the time offered me that opportunity, and I chose to go elsewhere on loan to try and explore other options and get in the shop window effectively, because I knew my contract was coming to an end. My dad encouraged that, and I encouraged myself to that. And I look back and think, because you've not from a footballing background, you didn't know, I never got that opportunity again to play championship football. If I had my time again, that was an example of, you're listening to outside voices that weren't expertise on it. Maybe I should have stayed and fought. I would have had an opportunity, at least one, to prove my level, my worth, and my career might have been different again. So it's a bit of a broad brush I've used there, but I guess be very careful who you listen to if they're not an expert of what they're talking about. That is certainly, something I've learned over the years.
Very good, Christian. I've thoroughly enjoyed this, and there's so much more that we could talk about. Thank you so much for making the trip. I think a lot of value is going to be had, not only from property investors, but also sports enthusiasts, professionals that really, really want to and need to take that next step. So thank you for sharing everything. And if people want to find you, what's the best way to reach out and find you?
Yeah, well, so I only really use Instagram to document our stuff, and I'm trying to spend a bit more time on there, but it's very hard when you're spinning all these plates at the same time. So I think my name on there is Chris M. Ribeiro. So just follow me on there, follow the journey of all the portfolios we're building for players, our own projects. If there's any players that are listening that want to have some advice or chat or want to build something, then they're more than welcome to message, and we'll go from there.
And we'll make sure all the links are in the show notes.
That's brilliant. Thank you.
Thanks for your time.
No problem. Cheers.